Our aim with this podcast is to help provide some facts and figures to help us all work together on making our diets more climate friendly. It's not easy, but my guest today has made it their mission to help individuals who are trying to negotiate these complex choices. James Hand is a data scientist and the co-founder of Giki, which stands for Get Informed, Know Your Impact. And it's an app and social enterprise which aims to help people live more sustainably. And I was just hearing it's got over 100,000 people signed up now. So that's amazing to see it's really taking off, James. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
A lot of the work you're doing at Giki is about helping people think about the size of their carbon footprint and what steps they might take to reduce it. And I know that's covering all areas of people's lives, but here on this podcast, we're focusing on food. So on an individual level, how big an impact does changing your food choices actually have? And how easy or hard do you think it is to change your food compared with making changes to other parts of your life, like the way you commute to work or travel abroad, for example?
Yeah, so in terms of the impact you can have, it is really significant. So all of the different choices you can make, from what you eat to how you cook, there's a huge number of things that you can do to have an impact. So definitely big. In terms of the ease, well, there's really a scale there. So we speak to loads of people who are trying to change their diet to be more climate friendly. In all that time, we've spoken to thousands of people. I've never yet once met someone who went from a totally sort of typical diet to kind of fully plant-based, fully vegan overnight. I'm sure they're out there, but we haven't met them yet. But plenty of people who are kind of taking the steps along the way. So it's easy to kind of take steps. It's hard just to wake up one morning and go, right, that's it. I'm going to the lowest carbon footprint diet possible.
Yeah, I guess so. There's challenges and there's maybe so we can come up with some tips that people can think about. So you're a data scientist like me. So let's talk about some numbers. The average person causes about 6 kilograms of emissions each day from the food that we're eating. So if we want to tackle climate change, what would you say we should be aiming to get that number down to?
Well, I think most people should be able to halve their carbon footprint from their diet by making different choices, by taking those steps over time. And that is really with a focus on switching to a more plant-based diet, which sits at the core of a lot of the key things that people need to do. And that really highlights how substantial it is, that there aren't actually that many other areas of your personal footprint where you can make such big changes kind of potentially so quickly.
So now that we know what we're aiming for potentially, then let's talk a bit about the options that we've got in a bit more detail. So one of the things I'm interested in is where to focus. And we know there's some data from the Food Standards Agency, which says that quite a lot of people, I think it's about 74%, think it's important to buy food that has low environmental impact. But when they're asked about the factors that contribute the most, then they say things like packaging and transport at the top of the list, that's 46%. And meat production was right at the bottom. So I'd like to talk a bit about these factors. So can we start with transport? It's quite small, isn't it? So this idea that we should all eat local is a bit of a misconception.
Yeah, so we actually ask a very similar question when we do live events with people about, where do you think the biggest parts are? And as you say, transport and packaging almost always come out top. I think there are lots of reasons for that. One is sometimes, there's this idea that a lot of the transport is air freighting, which we should come back to because that is very bad, but quite unusual. Generally, though, transport and packaging tend to be kind of less than 10% of the overall carbon footprint of a food. It might be a bit higher for foods with lower carbon footprints, but especially for the meat and things like that. So what you eat has a bigger impact than where you get it from. However, I'm also a big believer in looking at all the different things that you can do to reduce your impact. So for some people saying, look, you've got to shift from lots of red meat to no red meat, very hard to happen. And also you're just going to put them off. But if they are interested in buying more seasonal, looking at buying more local, properly local, as in from their local community, and considering things like packaging and recycling the packaging, then great, start there. It's not going to be the biggest impact, but it is an impact, and those incremental wins I think can kind of build up. But as a single thing, people want one thing, one planet saver, that's probably not the place to start.
Should we talk a bit more about transport by boat versus air then?
So from the studies that I've seen, if you air freight, it can times by 10 the carbon footprint of your food. And as I mentioned, it doesn't happen so much anymore. But generally, if you're thinking about a soft fruit of some sort out of season, then there's a chance it might well have been air freighted. So generally, as a rule of thumb, if you think it's come by plane, try and avoid it. After that, things like ships are actually pretty efficient. Bananas come from the tropics, sort of packed on the boat green across, and it can have quite a low carbon. A lot of the transport footprint can actually just come in the UK as things shuttle back between kind of hubs and the shop. The main one there is, though, no planes.
Great, that's very helpful. And what about packaging?
So the packaging has a bit of an impact, but as you mentioned, not as big as a lot of people think. Now, a lot of that packaging is plastic, especially in the supermarket. We've got one step in Giki Zero, which is try and do a supermarket shop without any single-use plastic. It is really, really hard. Kudos to anyone listening who manages it. Unless you kind of go to a zero-waste shop and then your farmer's market with your own bags, it's going to be a real struggle. It's not a big part of the footprint, but again, I still think it's worth focusing on. More than 90% of plastic comes from fossil fuels. And so it is driving carbon into the atmosphere. It's part of this much wider industry where we need to make reductions. Also, in almost every single case, there is an option where you don't need to use plastic. It might in some cases be a little bit more expensive. It might be having no packaging at all, which raises some questions about wastage, but there are options out there. So I think the more people push on that, as well as part of a wider kind of plastic issue, the better that can be too.
Excellent. Just on the waste front there, so how important is it to worry about food waste? Still something about cucumbers, that if you buy a cucumber without the plastic wrap, then it's much more likely to go in the bin, basically. What do you make of that?
Yeah, if you decide not to go with plastic, then you definitely have to up your focus on making sure it doesn't go off. And that's about good planning. Generally, though, food waste as a whole is also a significant contributor to most people's footprint from what they eat. So for many people, it can be up to like 10% of their footprint is just wasted from the food. And that's not wasted as in how it gets to you or in the supermarket. That's wasted as in what happens from the time it gets into your house to the end. And there are two things to really focus on there. One is obviously just making sure that anything you buy, you eat. It saves money.
Win-win.
Exactly, a win-win. And I think increasingly in sustainability, that is so important. That message of the win-win is out there. So whether it's better for health and it happens to be sustainable, whether it saves money and it happens to be greener, this is really important to get more people to change. Being eco is great, but it's not enough in terms of driving different habits. But the other thing about the food waste is if you do have any food waste, pretty much the worst thing you can do is send it to landfill, because then it goes to landfill, it releases methane, super powerful greenhouse gas. So if you have got any leftovers, either if you're lucky enough to live in an area where the council collects it, obviously use that. If not, if you can compost, that's great too, but really try hard. Better not to have any, and if you do have any, be really mindful of what you do with it.
That's great, thank you. Well, I'm now picturing myself and maybe other listeners in the supermarket feeling a bit overwhelmed because we're trying to tackle climate change and also get some food that your family isn't going to hate you for when you serve up for dinner. You want to make some positive choices. So it's not about packaging and transport so much. We talked a little bit about plant-based, but have you got any sort of more specifics on that? Because I guess, again, you think plant-based, and am I now looking for a packet which has the word plant-based on the front? Or, have you got any sort of tips on that?
Generally, there's sort of a hierarchy of the foods that you eat and the carbon footprint that they come attached with them. And beef and lamb will tend to be at the top, and root vegetables and things like that will be at the bottom. And then you kind of go up from there. So from beef, lamb, down to pork, chicken, cheese, fish, and then down to veggies and other things. So anything plant-based, doesn't have to be a plant-based sausage, anything that's kind of planty is going to have a lower carbon footprint. However, many people aren't ready to make those degrees of changes in one go, not go down and buy the roast, but instead go down something else. So anything people can do to kind of mix in more plants is a really nice way to get there. And as an example of how that can work, there are some companies introducing products around like these things called 50-50 burgers. And a 50-50 burger, kind of like the numbers say on the tin, will reduce the carbon footprint, not quite by 50, but by a big amount. And in blind taste tests, they do just as well, if not better. However, when you then tell people it's a 50-50 burger, that changes. So we have culturally, based on where we've been historically, we have this sense that is the way to go. So things you can do are things like substitute some of the meat for something else in a chili con carne, in a spaghetti bolognese, whatever that might be, to kind of start moving you in that direction. So at the high level, yeah, more plants, better. However, when you're thinking about, as you said, the food that you're going to put on the table that my daughters aren't going to shout at me for, then thinking about the steps you can take to get there can make a big difference. And to right at the start, when we were talking about the big shift you can make in your diet to halving it, Well, if you go mainly plant-based, cut out the red meat where you can, substitute it, save it for the special occasions, you can still get a big part of the way there. And I've certainly found with people that message, do what you can, start where you are, keep going, think progress, don't aim for perfection, helps behaviour change a lot more than any attempt to ban stuff. We rile against it. No one wants it.
I mean, to keep that energy required to keep that going, it's so easy just to think, right, I failed, so I'm going to give up.
Right, exactly, yeah. This was my goal. It was incredibly high. I didn't get there, so now stop. And that doesn't help. Rather give yourself a pat on the back for what you did do, and then think about what you might think about when you're planning out your supermarket shop next week.
Brilliant. Really great advice. So you and I work in this area, but many people are maybe thinking about this when they're trying to decide what to put into their shopping basket. And I'm interested in what you think are the most effective ways to help people change their behaviour, making it easier to make better choices. For example, I'm on this advisory panel to DEFRA at the government that's looking at some of the questions about having a system for labelling about the carbon impacts on foods. Have you got any thoughts on whether that would actually help?
At the individual level, a lot of what we're talking about here, so just like getting the knowledge out there about the different choices you have, what matters, what doesn't, so that we're kind of equipping people to know what's right for them when they're in the supermarket. And in terms of like when people are actually in the supermarket, planning really, really helps. As a kind of aside, there's a lot of evidence that if you walk into the supermarket when you are hungry, you will come out with a trolley full of far less healthy food.
Oh, just a lot more food. I just get crazy if I'm hungry. Yeah,
exactly. Your body is just there going, I need this. It's an instinct. So good planning both for the supermarket shop and then also what you might do with any food that's left over. That really helps. In terms of at the more kind of like systems level, there is increasingly good evidence that labelling can help, but with one really important caveat in that it has to be really, really clear. So even in the UK for health, the traffic light labelling isn't necessarily clear enough for many people because they get a red and 3 greens. It's like, is that good? Is that bad? And you have your food, then you have your meal, then you have your diet over the week. It's not easy. So if there is labelling, then it's got to be super clear for people that whether it's A to F, 1 to 5, whatever it is, but something that they can really follow nice and simply. And the nice thing about labelling is that the argument against it used to be, there's just no data to do it, and actually that's changing. As an example, there are some great organisations coming through helping organisations to do the footprinting. And some of the big supermarkets like Tesco's, if you look in their sustainability reports, they talk about the fact that behind the scenes, they've got thousands of these things now. So we've got the info if we can get it out to people simply. So labelling can definitely help. All that said, the things that help more than labelling and perhaps even planning are price and convenience. So the plant-based produce, the quality stuff, and obviously fruit and veg and grains and pulses do this for themselves. They tend to be lower priced. But for the other stuff, especially the substitutes, we have to get to a point where you're not expecting people to pay the green premium in order to do the right thing for the planet. And when you get to price parity or ideally even a price sort of discount, then that will really help drive change. And finally, just straight up convenience. If the products are in the right place in the supermarket next to other things that you would typically buy at the same time, that's going to help. And so that's a lot of stuff, which highlights why behaviour change is hard. There are a lot of things pulling at you at the same time. But if we can just kind of get those in bit by bit, then you'll start to see that those changes happen. And it will feel small over a year for an individual or a society, but then you look over 10 years and then you're stunned by the pace of change.
Brilliant. I mean, how important are labels in driving the decisions made by the people who make the food and the supermarkets as well? Is it about the impact on the consumers, or could it have an impact even if consumers don't really notice the labels?
I think they are probably always slightly wary about being the first mover, always slightly wary about standardization. It needs to be the same for everyone. And this is why across like all of things climate related, the interplay of the individual, the company and government, and sometimes you do need some policy to help, and sometimes you need the individual, and sometimes you need kind of the triumvirate of all three to be doing their thing. So not to be pessimistic, but I would hesitate to imagine that they're going to do it totally of their own volition. But doesn't mean there's not a will to do it if there are some clear guidelines for it being a level playing field.
So are there other things apart from labels that you think could make a big difference to help people?
Not really beyond the ones we mentioned. Kind of the key one about price. We have this group that we call the super green, so like 5 to 10% of the population, and they will pay the green premium. They'll pay more. They will face more hassle, more admin. They will go to the wasteless shop, even if it's an extra walk around the corner, and they pay more when they get there, whilst it leaves them scratching their head about how that can be possible. But that group doesn't actually seem to be growing very quickly. But the next group, who we call the busy but awares, that group is growing very, very fast. More and more people are conscious about the need to do something, but there is like a convenience gap, a price gap, a sort of knowledge gap that we need to fill. And whether we're talking about second-hand clothes, heat pumps, where you've got to invest for the long term, all of the other choices that people can make in their lives, those kind of combinations of things is really important. But the price needs to be in support for many people to do it, and rightly so. I mean, that is how the system works, especially during a time when so many people are facing really sort of difficult choices, that it's got to be there. And how we get there, bit by bit, you're seeing it. So renewables being such a beautiful example at the moment, it is just cheaper to get solar or wind than any type of fossil fuel. And that's where we need to get to for as many green choices as possible, really, to drive fast change.
Makes a lot of sense. How important do you think it is about communities and what other people that are doing? Is that also an important factor?
Definitely. You are far more likely to change if other people around you are changing, especially those that you trust. Like kind of an outwardly expanding circle. So the people that you work with, your family or friends, if they're changing, if they're doing things, then that's a real persuasion because you trust them the most. Then you might kind of go out to perhaps influencers you follow on social media, people that you read about. Then you might kind of go out to a higher level of just people in the news that are talking about it. But basically, the more removed you get from you, the less it is you feel that you've got to change. There's a huge amount of kind of social norming that's important.
Are there other ways that the system could change? How fair is it to put all this burden on individuals to change their own diets versus almost individuals helping to enable systemic change that everybody can benefit from?
Yeah, I mean, this is the key classic question in sustainability: the role of the individual, the role of the company, the role of policy. However, I think we've got to a point now where there's just an understanding it is not one or the other, it's all three. And there's an interplay between them that we need, which makes it a harder problem to crack because you've got to have all of those things work in the same direction. But kind of making sure that the government's responsibility to set clear sort of equitable policies, especially around food and farmers and things like that, to ensure they're supported for anything, that becomes necessary. The companies then need to kind of play ball within that. And if they're given kind of strict rules and guidelines and regs, they'll kind of follow that and what the consumer wants. But then, yes, we as individuals, we need to be pushing for that change too. If we're not demanding it, the market isn't going to supply it. Sometimes it can feel that you as an individual, some of your actions are quite small. You have to almost like see it as, yeah, they might be, but there are lots of people like you. And that's the bit as an individual, just like when you kind of feel that sort of sense of momentum in a group around something. The problem is you don't see it every day with the choices that you make, but just know it's there. Just know that other people are really kind of concerned and interested and want to do something different, far more than many people realise. And then we've all got that kind of role to play. And it doesn't make it easy, but there is that appreciation now, I think, that it's not on one, certainly not on one individual, but it's not on one kind of group either. We need sort of quite a shared effort.
Brilliant. That's a really uplifting point to end on, I guess. So at the end of every episode, I'm asking, what are you having for dinner today?
So Wednesday night in my house is stir-fry night. So I'm not quite sure what sauce I'm going to choose yet, but it'll be some sort of a veggie stir-fry with some lovely noodles. And I will basically try and put as much spice into it as possible. And everyone else in my family will try and get me to take as much out. But that'll be the plan.
That sounds really great. Thank you so much for your time, James. It's just been a pleasure chatting with you and so many great tips there. I hope you have a lovely dinner.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.